Hello, everybody, and welcome back to BioSC 140 Human Physiology. This video is going to cover the nervous system, S2P3, and this is part 1. This is lecture exam 2 material. So, first off, let's talk about the organization of the nervous system. So, we have the nervous system as a whole. We're going to break it into two different categories: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So nervous system as a whole, the first dividing branch, it's going to be central nervous system or peripheral nervous system. So central nervous system plus peripheral nervous system equals nervous system. Let's go down the central nervous system path first. The central nervous system has two components: your brain and your spinal cord. Your brain and your spinal cord together make up your central nervous system. Now, let's go down the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system has two main components. It has your afferent nervous system and your efferent peripheral nervous system. Now, there are anatomic differences between the two. There are physiological differences between the two, but the best way to think about them is afferent send messages towards the central nervous system. Efferent nervous system send messages away from the central nervous system. Afferent nervous system are its nerves that communicate sensory information to your central nervous system. Efferent nervous system are nerves that send signals to things that can affect change. So it tells a gland to release something, tells a muscle to contract. Within your efferent nervous system, you have two main branches. You have your somatic and your autonomic. Somatic are your voluntary effectors. So it's the nerves that send messages to your quadriceps that say contract. You can voluntarily contract your quadriceps. You can think quadriceps contract, bam, quadriceps contract. Your autonomic nervous system works below the level of consciousness. Now, we've talked a good amount about the autonomic nervous system in this class already, and we're really going to dive into it deep in this series of lectures on the nervous system. This is actually one of the largest, one of the topics that we cover most in depth in this class. So your autonomic nervous system, it's the innervation to your sweat glands, the innervation to your heart. It's the innervation that can affect change, and it works below your level of consciousness. Now, there's two main branches that we've already brought up in this class from your autonomic nervous system. That is your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. So right here, we have central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord. Our central nervous system does information processing. So I've already talked a bunch in this video about how your afferent nervous system sends signals towards your central nervous system. Signals from sensory neurons, and how your efferent nervous system sends messages to things that can affect change. Well, the central nervous system receives those signals from your afferent nervous system. They need to process that information. Your central nervous system processes information. It takes that information from your sensory nerves, your afferent nerves, and it decides what it wants to do with that information. Once it's decided what it wants to do with that information, it uses the efferent pathways to affect that change. Peripheral nervous system contains two efferent components. So somatic or motor, it sends messages to your skeletal muscles. Now, this division of the peripheral nervous system, PNS is peripheral nervous system, it's voluntary for so skeletal muscle. You think quadriceps contract, your quadriceps contract. You think, I want to raise my hand up, bicep contracts. It also has some involuntary in the form of reflexes. So when the doctor hits your patellar tendon and it causes your quadriceps to contract and your foot to move forward, that's considered an involuntary, and it is this branch, the somatic branch of your nervous system. The autonomic nervous system innervates smooth muscle, innervates cardiac muscle, and internal organs. It's involuntary. It works below the level of consciousness. Those two main divisions of the autonomic nervous system, you've got parasympathetic and sympathetic. Parasympathetic is often called your rest and digest nervous system, and sympathetic is your fight or flight. Another way to think about it, we've talked about tonic control in this class. So there's always some level of activity within your parasympathetic and sympathetic, no matter what you're doing. But the frequency at which those signals are sent by your parasympathetic nervous system can change, just like how the frequency at which your sympathetic nervous system can send signals can change also. Another way to look at this is let's look at these photos down here. This right here is Po. He's the Kung Fu Panda. When Po is fighting foes, his sympathetic nervous system increases the frequency at which it sends signals. When Po is eating foe, when he's resting and digesting, when Po is eating foe, the soup, he's resting and digesting. Parasympathetic nervous system increases the frequency at which it sends signals. The autonomic nervous system has two antagonistic divisions. So the majority of the time, things that are innervated by your autonomic nervous system have dual innervation. They're innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they're antagonistic. So heart rate, for example, parasympathetic slows heart rate when it sends signals. Sympathetic accelerates the heart rate. They're antagonistic to each other. One will increase a variable, one will decrease a variable. Not everything is innervated by both branches, though. Some things are only innervated by one of the branches, like your sweat glands. Sweat glands are only sympathetic branch innervated. Only sympathetic branch innervated. If you increase the frequency at which sympathetic nervous system signals are sent, you'll increase sweat production, release. If you decrease sympathetic activity, you decrease the amount of sweat you're producing. Later on, we'll talk about a dual innervation example where both of them promote the action. We'll get to that near the end of this lecture, near the end of these slides, actually. You do not need to memorize every single function of the autonomic nervous system, every single function of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You should know about the ones I specifically talk about in class, though. You should know about the ones I specifically talk about in class. All right, so for part one of nervous system video, I wanted to cover the structure of the nervous system, the overall organization. So that is the end of our part one video. I will see you in part two. Email me if you have any questions.